we'll wait a few more minutes before we officially start. We can get a little bit of a head run on it. Go ahead, Karen.
Figures out there.
Tom, how are you? Thank you.
So now we're JUDIE project manager.
That's it, you involved?
DIPIPPO, Cornerstone Environmental Group.
John SPEER, Councilman Borough, Ringwood.
Tom White, Oakland resident.
Ken Petrone, New Jersey DEP.
Mark Earthberg, DPP Community Relations.
Jim Guinan, resident.
Whichever's back.
Ron Kennedy, CAG member, resident.
WENKE CAG member.
Milligan, but I'll be about.
Thank you, TAULE resident.
And I am JUDIE TALBOT. I'm an independent facilitator. I used to work at the University of Virginia and have since moved a little closer. Tonight, we're going to review the agenda, and is Lisa planning?
Yes, she just has to wait till her husband gets home.
Okay.
And it's, so,
Yes,
And-
she wasn't. And Gretchen is Mrs.
If we go through the agenda, first thing, as I noted, I did a test run last night, but of course, it's taking longer tonight. When the green light comes on, we're ready for coffee, tea, hot chocolate. We have a break scheduled a little bit after 7:30, but please feel free to get up, walk around. Restrooms are in the corner. The meeting goals for tonight are to review and discuss the revised feasibility study, and that will be at Joe GOWERS. To talk about the proposed outreach letter regarding the use established on the geotextile cap at O'Connor disposal area, and to finalize the current version of the bylaws for the community advisory group. As we go through, we're going to first approve the minutes for December 13th. Those were sent out quite a while ago because, of course, the January meeting was canceled with the federal shutdown. We'll have an update and talk about where we meet, information sharing, including ways to increase information on the web, and talk a bit about the February working session that we had. Joe will lead off the session on the revised feasibility study, talk about comments that were submitted, the responses. We'll also hear about some comments that were received recently and they haven't had a chance to review and comment on it. We do have a break scheduled. After that, we'll be talking about outreach in the letter regarding use on the OCDA cap. And then at 8:10, what we're going to do is provide a high-level overview of some of the changes to the bylaws for the CAG. After that, we will have public comment, recap, and talk about next meeting dates. When it's likely that there will be enough content for the next meeting and what the date should be for that. After that, anyone who needs to leave can. The CAG is going to go through the bylaws section by section, just to make sure that everyone knows what is in the bylaws, see if any changes are needed, and hopefully this will become our current working version. It might not be as tantalizing for others who are not on the CAG, and that's why we'll allow people to break after that point in time, and then we will adjourn. We did start just a few minutes early, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
I'm Julia Summers. I'm Executive Director of the New Jersey Highlands Coalition.
Thank you. And Lisa?
Lisa Chiang, I'm a Ringwood resident.
Okay.
And most importantly, I was up all night baking these cookies. Good job. They're amazing.
Did you?
No,
All right. Later on, after the bylaws, we're also going to talk about the videoing, which has been a practice. The notes from DeMaximus have really been highlights. They also provide, is that right? It is DeMaximus.
Yes, it's right here, right there.
And there are also transcripts available, so there's a lot of documentation for the meetings. Right now, they're at the meeting notes, they're at a little bit higher level. Did anybody have any changes that they wanted to make for the minutes on the December 13th meeting minutes? Okay. Moving on to updates, let's first start with asking agencies if there's any updates that they'd like to provide. We have the progress reports for January and February that have been submitted. And with DEP, it sounds like there's been work done on permits. Would you like to just say a few words about that?
Actually, Gary would do that.
Okay.
All the content for the permit applications for the division of land use with the DEP have been submitted at this point. We've worked out a few questions about the mitigation planning. And now we're down to just confirming some language related to the conservation easements that have been applied to the mitigation areas for the land use work that will be done. So that's where it stands. I think we're essentially done, except for those few bits about confirming conservation easements.
Any updates from EPA other than what we will be covering on the agenda? Okay. Does anybody else have project-related updates that they would like to announce? Anything from the borough? Anyone else?
Yeah, I got one to announce.
Okay, Lydia?
It's right here, all right? This is going to be a project update because this is all obituaries.
All?
Obituaries
Okay.
that I intend to hopefully sit, and log all this information to, as far as all the deaths and everything, on my, without the state doing their cancer study. I have my own, I have some work cut out for me here, but hopefully I'll get this together.
Okay, and prepare it as some
Information
that needs to feed in. Okay?
This is a no bid book that I started back in 2000 and it got too devastating, so, it's something that I'd like to, it's a never ending job, so continue to work on it.
On the meeting facilities, we have met in a couple of different locations. Previously, there were meetings in the borough. There have been meetings at the library, and there have been meetings here. I did reach out to Scott Heck and asked him if we might be able to use the borough hall for CAG meetings, and also I asked him what his sense was of how we might be able to coordinate public meetings once activities actually start on the site, because then that's certainly going to be an area where the borough, the public, the CAG are all meeting together. He is reaching out to the council members, and I am following up on insurance requirements, but we are looking into options for meeting facilities so that we, especially in winter, might want some options other than the church. We're grateful to have it. And we will keep you updated as we find out more. I'm going to flip the next two items on the February working session. One of the major items was reviewing the bylaws, which is on today's agenda, and we will walk through that later at the end of the meeting. The other piece that we discussed was the need for user-friendly information, which is easy to access, easy to understand, and related to the decisions that need to be made. Right now, there are a number of websites that contain information about Ringwood mines. And EPA site is one, the borough is another, there's a Facebook page with the CAG, there is the old CAG website that was established by Oswego. And we're looking for options to draw those together, or at least provide one point reference that people can reach links on other sites. And also to summarize information, because the record of decision and a lot of these technical documents are really very comprehensive. And if you want an understanding about the mines, if you want an understanding about what has happened with the Commerce disposal area, you really have to look through a lot of reports, and that was one of the other things that we discussed at the February working session. So regarding that, we are talking with EPA on Monday, and I'm going to reach out. I think Bob Spiegel had previously offered the use of the site if somebody wanted to update it, but that was probably a while ago, and we need to see if that offer is still on the table.
And I don't know, I mean, he's really kind of out of the picture right now, he has some health issues, so I don't know.
The website is still live.
I know, so I think probably his assistant,
Sharon.
Shannon,
Yep.
yeah, I mean, we should reach out to her and see.
Yeah, we'll contact us and let them know.
I talked to him last week.
Oh, you talked to Bob?
Yeah.
How's he doing?
How is he?
He's just got out of rehab, he's had surgeries, he's really, he's been through
A lot.
a rough journey, he's had a lot of titanium and putting his head, his leg, every part of his body. But he doesn't want to give up the fight, he's still willing to try to do what he can do or whatever.
That's great.
Hopefully he'll show up, he's on the road to recovery after a couple months in hospitals with surgeries.
So it looks pretty good, then?
Well, hopefully,
Yeah,
it's coming along.
Yeah, oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
And we wish him well,
Yeah.
for sure. So those were the updates that we have. And in your meeting packets, see, I don't have that problem with reception here. My phone isn't great.
What? Hello?
What you'll see in your packets are,
Hey, I'm down to the church every
you
year.
may remember that back in December, Skio was here and did a presentation on the
Feasibility study, focus feasibility study report, they provided their fact sheet and
Thank you.
the summary and
In the fact sheet here, this was the two-page comments that are for your review. And you also have the Cornerstone response to comments. So Joe is going to come up, talk a little bit about the comments that were submitted by EPA, and they include comments from DEP, how those have been responded to, and new comments that have been received within the past. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You come up or?
Yes.
Just
It's
sit
good
here
to
or-
hear.
Okay, everybody here?
Actually, up here is good because we don't have a hard time
Yeah,
hearing and seeing here.
Oh.
Thank you. Your best side.
Okay, yeah, so I guess the major document that we wanted to just sort of discuss was the focus feasibility study, the draft focus feasibility study that was actually submitted by Cornerstone back in October. In December, EPA submitted a comment letter on that document to Cornerstone that incorporated comments, not just the EPA's comments, but also NJDEP's comments and some of its past comments also. That prompted Cornerstone to submit a revised focus feasibility study to address those comments, and that was submitted back on March 7th. Along with that document was submitted the response to comment letter, basically Cornerstone explaining how they responded to each of those comments. Now, I can go through that response to comment letter, hit some of the major comments that the agencies had on the document, and the responses that were pretty much given by Cornerstone. Again, we're still, only had a report a week, we're still going to be looking through that document to make sure we believe are being adequately addressed. But one of the concerns that EPA had was, and also I think the task contractor also mentioned this, was the way risk was discussed in the document. Risk was indicated as being insignificant, and what we just really wanted was to point out in the document that when the human health risk assessment was conducted, one of the exposure pathways, basically the potential future residential use of water at the site, the cancer risk that was calculated slightly exceeded EPA's acceptable risk range. We wanted that to be laid out in the focus feasibility study report. And also with regards to use of the air shaft water, potential future use of the air shaft water, again, the risk slightly exceeded EPA's acceptable risk range. And we wanted that to be laid out better within the focus feasibility study report. And Cornerstone clearly wanted to make it clear that there's no real current risk with regards to water at the site. Nobody's using it for drinking, and also there's certain regulations in place which would sort of prevent the use of the most contaminated water. So we came to some sort of agreement in terms of language, and the report should have been revised to reflect that. The other concern the EPA had was the way the no action alternative was discussed in the focus feasibility study report. Basically, the way it was laid out originally in the draft report, it included the establishment of a classification exception area, so basically institutional controls, and that's not really allowed when we're looking at no action alternatives. It has to be no action, nothing taken, so presumably the report's been revised to revise the no action alternative so that that classification exception area is removed from the no action alternative. The state of New Jersey wanted a closure-only alternative looked at for the Peters Mine Pit air shaft, and that apparently has been included in the revised report.
Including figures.
Yes, and there's also, also there was a request for figures with regards to that alternative to be included within the report, and presumably that was also included. We also wanted the uncertainties with regards to the biochlor model better laid out within the focus feasibility study report, and it appears that language doing that has been included in the report. There's a comment with regards to a discussion of the additional groundwater monitoring wells. There's a lot of discussion about which wells will be monitored as part of the long-term groundwater monitoring plan. The discussion of sentinel wells, where those sentinel wells would be. We just wanted that to be clarified that basically those discussions are really for evaluating alternatives and costing purposes in the focus feasibility study. The actual long-term groundwater monitoring plan is actually going to be laid out in the remedial design report, and basically in the remedial design phase, as Ken pointed out. In the past, there was going to be a CEA established by the state of New Jersey.
CDA.
That's a classification exception area. It's basically just to let people know that there's an area which exceeds groundwater quality standards because of the contaminated site. It also helps with regards to the state looking at permits for new wells being installed, and let them know, I guess, that there's this concern there, and then the state could either approve or not approve permits within that area, or require the wells to be installed at a deeper depth or something like that, where to basically avoid that contaminated area. Yeah, I know. The ISO concentration figures, we actually had asked for them to be expanded, but after discussions with Cornerstone, we came to an agreement that the ISO concentration figures really couldn't be expanded for the site, given the limited amount of data in some of the other areas of the site with regards to 1,4-dioxane detection. Now, there are a whole bunch of specific comments. I don't know if you want to, a lot of these are just clarifications, typos, things of that nature. If you want me to go through that, I could.
I wonder if you should explain what closure-only alternative is.
But basically, rather than, right now, one of the alternatives of the initial feasibility study would have been putting something down in the shaft to treat the 1,4-dioxane and the benzene in the shaft and then sealing up the shaft.
Right.
Well, it was a request to have just a closure only, just seal up the shaft alternative, also included in the focus feasibility study report, and it looks like that has been included in the revised focus feasibility study.
So what you're putting in under before you initiate the grout, how long is that active?
Well, it'll be a slow release type of compound, so it'll be active for quite some time.
Like years?
Yeah, it could be active for years, depending on how much is put down and the type of compound that's put down here.
Can you just say a little bit more for people who may not be tracking that, but about the compound and the release? That is part of the...
That was actually part of one of the alternatives that
one of the current alternatives that are in there.
the one that was in the draft feasibility study report, and now that alternative will be in the feasibility study report, but then there'll also be just a simple closure-only alternative included within that report.
So, since there's so much water in that shaft, maybe you should explain what happens to that water once the grout, because it's going to be grouted, and then the water at the same time is going to
It's got to be displaced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, will it be displaced in an organized way, or is it just going to go all over the place?
No, we'll make sure that if that's the alternative that's selected and implemented, that it just doesn't go all over the place.
So,
We'll make sure that,
where are you going to direct it?
Let me just back up one question. So if that is selected, what's the level of detail that is needed in describing the alternatives to be able to weigh them is one question. And then second of all, when whatever alternative is selected, we'll then go into deeper detail and what's that process for,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Again, once the alternatives. I mean, that's why you're looking at a feasibility study.
Yes, I
This isn't.
understand.
It's not a design report. So we just look at get enough information to basically to do a comparative analysis of each of those alternatives, looking at the 9 factors that we've discussed in the past for that. However, a lot of the additional detail is going to be actually included and developed in the remedial design phase. Once the remedy is selected, after the record decision is issued, then there would be the process where there would be a remedial design report developed, similar to what happened with OU2, and that report will lay out a lot more detail. And that's one of the notice, like, there were some of the comments provided by the task contractor, which were not included in our comment letter, and that was because a lot of the issues, you should include all these wells in that. Again, as we indicated in our comment here, or our comment on the document, on the draft focus feasibility study report, again, identifying all those wells. I mean, that's all going to happen in the remedial design phase. Determining the exact monitoring program, the exact wells that are going to be sampled, the sentinel wells, the placement of the sentinel wells. That'll be developed in coordination with the state of New Jersey during the remedial design process.
Do you have a time frame now?
A time frame for
When the rod is coming out?
well, that's what the next issue is, of course, that we just received comments from the North Jersey District Water Supply Commission, and now
let's go to that.
Yes.
So let's talk about that, and then we'll move to the plan.
Okay.
Sure. Well, again, we just, as you're aware, we just received comments from the North Jersey District Water Supply Commission. Some of those comments are clearly significant, and we're going to need to review and evaluate those comments. So in terms of giving you a time frame, I would think that previously we had indicated we might have a ROD by a certain time. This may push that back because we're now going to need to evaluate these comments and see if there's any additional work that we really need to do in order to address those comments.
Can you give us a hint as to what some of the comments are?
Sure. I mean, well, a couple of the big comments.
Yeah.
One of them was that there should have been an alternative, basically a pump and treat alternative for the air shaft evaluated. And that's something we're going to need to look at. My geologist is going to have to look at that. And Cornerstone is going to be looking at that. I mean, my feeling is there are some concerns. I have some concerns with regards to that. It almost seems like the water district is looking at the air shaft as if it's an extraction well, a bedrock extraction well. It's not. It's a large air shaft, large quantities of water. You've got large tunnels full of water, all these preferential flow pathways, which are these tunnels. That's going to have to be looked at in terms of whether or not that's actually a viable alternative.
But if it seems like that would be the best place to have that alternative, would be at the shaft.
Yeah, I mean, but basically, well, clearly, I mean, you're correct. I mean, the best place to do any sort of treatment would be in the shaft, and that's why we were proposing within the focus feasibility study, sort of in situ, in the shaft, treatment alternative. And they're basically saying, let's pump it out and then treat the water. And that's something we have to look at, what the pros and cons are of that. Again, some of their, what's indicated, it seems like they almost look at it like an overly simplistic fashion. They're looking at it as more like you're pumping a bedrock extraction well and with cold water from the fractures around it, but it's a little bit different situation here given the volume of water, these preferential flow pathways, which are the mines themselves. My concern is that I'm going to be pulling in relatively clean water from the Peters Mine pit. We're going to be dewatering the Peters Mine pit at some point, which has very low levels of any of the constituents based upon our mine.
So Joe, let me just clarify. Right now, the feasibility study has a treatment option in as one of the alternatives, and the approach that's being taken and described in the feasibility study is in place, that the treatment would occur within the shaft.
That's correct.
And what the district is asking is, should there be consideration of an alternative where you're treating the water, but taking it out of its current location?
Pulling it out of the, basically pulling it out of the shaft and treating the water.
And you're going to be looking at...
We will be looking at that.
And recycling it, right?
Excuse me?
And pumping it out, treating, recycle.
What I mean is we're going to be evaluating that comment to see whether or not...
You'll be pumping, treating, and recycling the water.
Well, you
Yeah.
pump and treat and
Yeah.
then discharge
Discharge.
some of the clean water somewhere, basically.
Right.
So, again, it isn't all clearly all
And it
flushed,
would be
all flushed out
something
in their proposed in their comment letter,
It
but
would take years, wouldn't it?
Are they
Well,
thinking, in their mind,
again-
is it ongoing?
For eternity?
well, I would assume that's what they're looking at is basically we're running a pump and treat system, but pulling from the air shaft. I mean, again, we have to, the comments weren't fully developed within their comment letter, and we have to look at what they proposed. And one of the other bigger ones that I was concerned about was they almost seemed to indicate that they feel we should have done a directional boring program, basically drilling holes and poking down into the mine workings to try to find a discrete source of the 1,4-dioxane.
Right, that's their main concern.
And and again, that's something we're going to have to look at, given the fact that the extensive
Mine works.
the extensive mine works, trying to hit shafts when all you have are basically hand-drawn drawings from the 1940s, and then there's other things we have to worry about. What sort of information are you actually going to get from that? If I hit presumably some water with 1,4-dioxane in it on the 4th level of the mines, what does that tell me? I mean, does it actually tell me where the discrete source is? I mean, you're not going to drill down and hit a drum and basically say, oh, there's a discrete source. I mean, what you're going to find is basically water, and if the shafts are flooded, and does it contain 1,4-dioxane? Does it not contain 1,4-dioxane? And if you don't detect it on level 4, does that mean it's not on level 5? Or so. I'm just a little concerned about what information we would actually get from some sort of extensive investigation of that nature.
And Joe, there's been previous, aside from the particular approach being used here or suggested, the diagonal bore drilling, there's been talk in the past about whether or how much investigation there is in terms of trying to identify the source of the hotspot.
Yeah, I mean, we've had discussions with regards to that, and also, we've also indicated here that, because, we see it in the air shaft, we presume there's probably 1,4-dioxane in the flooded shafts elsewhere. It's probably just not in the air shaft. It's probably elsewhere. And the question is it worthwhile and, technically, practicable to actually go and start drilling holes into the bottom of Hope Mountain to try, you're looking at a well net, a shaft network that's what, 17 levels and 1,500 feet down. Not to mention the fact that if you drill through, you could be opening up another pathway for water with 1,4-dioxane in one part of the mine to get to another part of the mine. So there's a lot of things that we need to consider, and the technical folks will be looking at that.
Seems like it's going to be pushed back quite a bit.
Well, what I'm saying is, what I'm indicating is I personally question whether anything of that would be
But the analysis to look and sift through and make the response and make
That's
a
right.
determination about what
we need
needs
to
be
evaluate
revised.
what was submitted, and we'll come back with some sort of response with regards to that.
So those were the major comments?
Yeah, there were a number of other comments we're still going through, but those were the ones that sort of caught my attention.
Right.
There are other ones about doing additional surface water sampling, comments that we can probably work with,
Right.
but those in particular seem to be they were of concern when I read.
Well, they already did say that they thought the pump and treat would be the way to go with the shaft and the objective.
They did indicate that some sort of treatment would be the way to go. We felt that an in-situ treatment would probably be better, not disturbing everything, the whole situation there within the mine workings, and potentially making the problems worse there. We thought that putting something down and actually doing an in-situ treatment might be a better option. They're indicating they feel, again, that pumping, and they think that pumping is going to sort of control migration. And this is something we'll be looking at.
Now, the other thing is, when Joe did his walkthrough of comments, does anyone else have questions about comments that were made or how they were responded to?
I've got a question.
Yep.
So you're saying potable, the water is potable now?
Potable means, basically, the water beneath the site is classified by the state of New Jersey as a potential drinkable water source, a Class 2 aquifer.
Right.
So basically, when we did the human health,
At the Peters Mine Center?
basically the whole area, the water system, the groundwater beneath that area is considered a Class 2 aquifer,
Okay.
which means it's a potential potable water supply.
Right.
Even though it's not being utilized right now,
But
there's the potential for it, based upon that classification, to be utilized in the future.
if I'm reading this correctly, it's saying that it's plausible?
It's classified. So it's not saying that it should or...
It's classified that it could potentially be used as drinking water.
Not now.
It's not being utilized now.
So this
And
is...
it could
It's not being utilized now.
No, it's not being
I
utilized.
understand.
Yeah.
But what's the classification?
Two, the state of New Jersey classifies pretty much all the groundwater in the state as potential potable water source.
Okay.
Even though a lot of the state of New Jersey does not meet the standards to be a potable water source, we consider any groundwater to be a potential potable water source. So we want it to be cleaned up to potential potable water criteria.
Doesn't this...
This right now does not meet it, right?
Right, but the suggestion is that it could meet that.
In the future.
That would be the goal.
That would be the goal. The state's goal is for all the waters of the state to meet criteria to be potable water source. That's our goal. It may take 30 years to clean up,
Or 100.
It's not marathon.
but we always have a goal of making all the groundwater in the state a potable drinking water source, except for where saltwater intrusion occurs or makes it non-potable. But every other place in the state, we want the goal to be clean it up to safe drinking water standards.
So how, I mean, in the report it also suggests that one day somebody could actually drill a well there unknowingly.
Well,
how could that ever happen?
That's the reason for what Joe was talking about. The classification exception area, the CEA, there's a law that also requires when it doesn't meet the safe drinking water standards, then it has to be classified as an exception area. It's not meeting the standards, and that's an institutional control to prevent anybody from using it as a drinking water source because it does not meet potable drinking water criteria.
Thank you.
So it's prohibited at this time.
It will be when it's not prohibited, it just will be designated as an area of groundwater that does not meet drinking water standards. And if somebody comes to put in a well there, our well permit people will know that and say, wait a minute, that area is contaminated. We can't give you permission to put a well in there unless you do this, that, or the other thing. Which may mean drilling a deeper well, putting treatment on your well, whatever it takes to make it potable.
Do you have any idea if years ago the borough of Ringwood tried to find water up in Upper Ringwood, drilled 4 wells? Because we have the situation where all of our water is like up high, so at the other side of town. So I actually heard from the engineer at the time that there were many times that they tried to drill in Upper Ringwood to find water.
I don't know. That would be water supply group or water
Yeah.
supply group, but I don't know. It's possible.
Yeah.
Maybe under a permit or.
Well, there's a permitting process for wells, yeah, that requires everyone to get a
I mean,
permit.
supposedly they didn't hit water, but that seems pretty amazing because there is water up there.
Yeah.
Just a aside. Thanks.
And with the conversation about the complexities and the comments recently received, we have our little status graph here on the process updated. And as you see, OU3 is the feasibility study. I'm going to pause just for a minute here to talk about potential timing just for next steps, because each step down the road is contingent on the step right in front of you. And right now, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Are the reservoir comments going to be released on the webpage or?
They will be. We're in the process of putting them up on the website.
Thank you.
We'll send a note out to the, are you on the email distribution list? So we'll send a note out when it's posted.
Yeah.
That's in the district water. Yeah, okay. As we look at this, and when we take the break, we'll turn the computer back on. It can get a little loud. That for OU2, on the left side of the column, the remedial design report was approved by EPA, and we're in that period pending when the consent decree will be lodged with the federal court. So that's where things stand.
Would you maybe just say like what OU2 is, just in case?
Which is I would classify it as like the soil and more or less the surface component.
It's basically the land disposal areas. It's the Peters Mine pit, Catamine pit, and O'Connor disposal areas, but not the ground.
OU3 is the ground.
Only three.
And now, in terms of timing in, whenever that consent decree gets lodged, you're gonna notify us that, and that starts a whole new timeline.
That'll start a whole new timeline with regards to submittal of the remedial action documents, when that's lodged and entered.
And with OU3, we're now in the middle of the feasibility study with new comments coming in. And one of the things we'll be discussing later are meeting dates. The next meeting would be early in the month, in April, I think it's the 9th, if there's a meeting.
It would,
It's
it
the
will be the 11th.
April 11th. So in terms of feasibility study, do you have a sense of the minimum, or might it be ready by April 11th? Would it be a little wiser to push it?
It would probably be a little bit wiser to push it because, again, we have these new comments in, and we're going to have to take those comments into concern and evaluate those comments before we can sort of move forward with that, with the feasibility study.
And so, knowing that part of the issue was the government shutdown, you guys submitted your comments on the feasibility study back in December. And so on March 7th, knowing that there was, extra circumstances there, but it takes a while to work.
Yes.
Okay. Other questions for Joe on the feasibility study, the links to the document?
What is the comment period again? The public?
But we don't have one yet.
No, the actual public comment period would be triggered once the focused feasibility study report is considered approved, and EPA releases its proposed plan to the public, basically proposing the remedy we think should be implemented. That would start the public comment period, which is typically a minimum of 30 days. And there's always a public meeting within that public comment period, a formal public meeting.
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet because we're still working on the focused feasibility
If
study.
you look at this diagram, after the feasibility is completed, then the proposed remedial action plan is developed. Once the feasibility study is finalized, about how long does it take? I mean, is it weeks or is it months in terms of preparing the remedial action plan? Just ballpark.
No, wait, I think we're confusing.
Isn't this right here? Once this closes,
Once that closes, we get the proposed,
is that not right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
The proposed plan. But yeah, the proposed plan, usually we're looking at weeks, not
Okay.
months, after the feasibility study is sort of finalized.
Okay, so that's helpful to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone?
Okay.
Okay. Has the consent decree been approved by the state of New Jersey yet?
It's been evaluated by our attorneys, yes.
Yeah, and so it's,
I think their comments have all been incorporated. I know the attorneys are still talking, but we reviewed it, I reviewed it several times, they reviewed it several times. Been a lot of back and forth for several months, but I think now it's just that the attorneys are doing a little bit of back and forth. I'm out of it, I'm done.
okay, you're happy.
Soon, it should be very soon. Yeah.
Okay, that's too bad. But anyway, I have a question that has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. The O'Connor landfill is 14 acres in a 36-acre area. It's owned by the borough. You know. Was that whole area checked and investigated for sludge?
The whole
Yeah.
36.
Whole
There
36
is, well,
acres.
yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. At the beginning of our process back in 2005, there was basically a site reconnaissance survey where people employees walked everywhere out there, probed, looking for paint sludge. So yeah, all the areas where a truck could get to dispose of material, those areas were probed in that fashion. Also, when the O'Connor disposal area, which is clearly a disposal area, was investigated, there were test trenches installed all not just through, but also at the edges of that to sort of delineate the extent of contamination for the O'Connor disposal area. So, you know, we're pretty confident that, you know, that's the area of concern there. It doesn't extend over the whole 35 acres.
Can those trenches, how they go down to the tailings? I mean, how do you know?
Yeah, they actually, the trenches went down to the, they did go down into the tailings, into undisturbed tailings essentially.
Then how wide were they?
Well, as wide as a bucket, you know, as an excavator bucket.
So they would go down like 30 feet to the
They would
tailings?
go down, would it be 30 feet, but something almost, you know, 15, 20 feet in some areas.
Somewhat below tailings too, I think. Sometimes they went.
Yeah, sometimes it got to actual native soil.
Sometimes they went below the tailings
Okay.
to native soil. It all depended where they were.
So the area that was trenched, it was the entire O'Connor?
It was the entire, yeah, basically there were trenches throughout the entire disposal area. There were actually, I believe it was one or two long trenches that went the whole length from north to south in the O'Connor disposal area. And then there were a number of trenches running essentially east-west across the entire width of the O'Connor disposal area. That was actually the second phase of investigation. Then there were a bunch of smaller trenches that were installed during the first phase of investigation in the O'Connor disposal area.
And a lot of that work was informed by the CAG with Rich Chapin, right, when they did.
The CAG, yeah, the CAG was involved,
Right.
and was in, especially the second phase of investigation, the CAG was definitely up and running, and Rich Chapin was involved in evaluating that process.
So the ones going east to west, how far apart were they?
The ones going east to west, I don't know
like
exact number, I'm trying
10
to
yards,
visualize
100
it.
yards, or?
They're probably,
20 yards maybe.
yeah, maybe, it's
You can see figures of that in some of the old reports.
there were probably like 5 or 6
Yes.
large trenches, again, running across the entire width.
So a
of-
grid, basically a grid,
Basically,
grid
yeah.
the whole,
That's correct. And any of the ink sludge that was found during that investigation was shortly thereafter removed. There was over 2,000 tons of paint sludge removed from that area. There are some chunks still there, but
was that 2,000 tons in one spot, or was it sporadic over the whole?
it was primarily, there was one large spot that was essentially adjacent to a previously excavated area, which I believe was addressed back in the 1990s.
94 was the last one.
And this is an example of where it'd be nice to have information about O'Connor disposal area and the investigations, maybe a one-pager that people will be able to refer to, because the history goes back a long time. The information is covered in a number of reports, and it would be handy to pull the details together for reference.
You don't have like a map of those trenches or an area?
Yeah, there is a map. There's actually a map of those trenches in the O'Connor disposal area remedial investigation report. We'll show you exactly.
It's on the web?
That would be on the web. That would be part of the administrative record. You go online, you go to the site documents, go to the selections as administrative records. One of those documents will be the O'Connor disposal area remedial investigation.
And when we send out the link to the district comments, we'll also provide a link to where the information about the trenching investigations are in the report. I'll look
Okay,
it
yeah,
up.
we can.
Yeah. Just,
If I can add one quick thing, you did identify a few gate gaps during the remedial design, so there were a few additional trenches done.
Yes, there were.
site
Yes.
during the remedial design, and those are shown along with the RI trenches in the remedial design.
So if you're saying that you dug these trenches and you found toxic material chunks or whatever in those, then you would assume that in the area in between the trenches, there's probably more of that.
Well, I mean, we can't assume that because again, when they did find that paint sludge, they then excavated out to try to take out that whole area, that whole large disposal area. I can't tell you if there is or isn't paint sludge in between those little. There might be chunks of paint sludge mixed in there. I mean, you know, that's one of the reasons why we're proposing or have, or selected a remedy to that area is because we do know that there's waste in that area.
Yeah, proposing, okay.
All right, looking at the clock, what I'd like to do is offer a break.
Can we,
Go ahead.
I have a question. In the consent decree, are natural resource damages covered for the,
It's
for,
left open as far as I recall.
it's left open?
Yes.
What does that mean?
It's not being addressed by this consent decree.
But will it be addressed by the next one?
I can't answer that.
But you're not done, you gotta find out.
That's a big omission, isn't it?
And so I guess,
It's not ignored, but it's not addressed by, it's not one of the detailed items of the consent.
So it's not gonna go away? It's still going?
Right, it's not going
Okay.
away. Right.
so its absence doesn't mean it's falling off the table.
Right.
It's just not being addressed at this
By
time.
this consent decree.
Okay, that's a good point of clarification.
I asked the same question,
You did?
yes.
Because there's a lot, there's,
Because it wasn't addressed in there.
right, and it's a huge issue. I mean, for the state of New Jersey and for Ringwood.
In residence, yeah, that has been a huge issue for me, you know, so I don't know.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. And what I'm going to put on the agenda is that, future item, we've had the NRDA on the agenda before, and it needs to be periodically looked at again, just so that people are tracking with it and what next steps may be needed. Okay, with that, we will take a 10-minute break. Okay, so for this next element, this has to do with the designated use of recycling in O'Connor disposal area. And what I'm going to do is provide my facilitator's understanding of this. And I'm going to ask anyone, DEP, Mr. SPEER, Joe Gowers, anyone else, it's a very brief summary, but I want it to be accurate. While EPA and the process was going forward for selecting a remedy, there had been a preferred remedy identified to excavate and remove soil and waste from O'Connor disposal area. And before the record of decision was completed, the borough came forward and said that they were interested in putting the recycling center into the O'Connor disposal area, and that to accomplish that, it would be beneficial to look at the cap remedy instead of the excavation and removal. Is that a fair recap?
That's
Fair enough?
But didn't it go the other way? If it was capping first and then the recycling center?
No, basically, what she's indicating is
Yes.
basically, initially, the remedy that we were looking at was excavation
Yeah.
in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, right before we were going to release the proposed plan, the borough did come forward indicating that they were interested in building a recycling center in the O'Connor disposal area, presented some rough plans at that point in time, and that basically a containment remedy would be beneficial for that intended use of the property. And that's what triggered EPA putting the contingency remedy in the proposed plan, and the record of decision was the borough's intended use, or what they indicated their intended use of that property.
For the
I
recycling center.
never understood that.
We knew that. Okay, just pause for one moment, and I want to just do a scan. Is this consistent with everyone else's understanding, more or less? Okay, all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know, I want to go back before the break. About the non-pro resources and all this and that, blah, 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 blah. What did we talk about?
Natural resource damages?
Yes. So, you kind of put that, like I said, it's not done, right? But I'd like to bring it up. I want it to be something that stays up on the top of this pile, basically, if possible.
Address, so, we're gonna put
That's
a,
why I do it.
we're gonna put a hold on this letter, and because it's something that was brought up just before the break. Now, I've got a few action items up here. One is to periodically check in on the NERDAR process, and NERD, do I have too many letters in there? Okay. No what?
No R at the end.
Okay. And to find out what the next steps are to determine what's going to happen with that. Because it's been brought up, you've asked questions, and there may not be an answer right now, but I think that what Vivian's asking for is to find out what is going to be required to take it to ground, right? To make it, to deal with it and address it.
Yeah, instead of, totally blowing it out the wind,
Okay. The second action item that I have from before the break is that we're going to be sending out links on the comments from New Jersey District, and we're also going to provide a link to where the information about what trenching is in the OCDA remedial investigation report. So those are the two takeaways I have from the beginning. Now, moving to the
Let
recycling.
me just say one thing.
Okay.
So
Yep.
we have a very small group in the department that looks at natural resource injuries for every site in the state. So we have brought this to their attention that this is a Superfund. They look at all Superfund sites theoretically. So right now, this is not a high priority on their list, is all I can say. So they are looking at a lot of sites right now for natural resource injuries. They're not actively evaluating this site for natural resource injuries.
I didn't have that.
Okay. So I just wanted to, because they are aware of this site, and we have told them about the site that we finished the remedial investigation phase of this project. So that's usually when they would start to evaluate a site, a Superfund site for natural resource injuries, after the completion of the remedial investigation.
It might be helpful, just one thought, to talk about how they do prioritize, what are the criteria they look at for.
Hey, Kieran.
No, but they might be able to help people understand like where it fits, and that's not necessarily something we answered tonight, but maybe looking for.
Is that the team headed by John Sacker?
Used to be, yes. Dave Bean, I think, is running it now. John, yes, is still involved.
Certainly seems like we've had significant damages to our residents there. Why would that not be a priority for them?
And that's a question that we would have to ask what the
Resources
criteria
are
are.
limited.
Yeah, but the deaths were not.
Is there any way that we
We've
can,
had a lot
that
of
the
deaths.
residents can put pressure on them, like, go lay down in front of their door or something, or write a letter,
people that have left.
like,
You can write a letter.
squeaky wheel gets
You can write a letter to the department, to the commissioner, or to me, or somebody.
How are those injuries not adequate to?
I don't set their priorities. They're a different group, and they have been made aware of it, but I don't know. I'm not the one to tell which sites to look at. So, I mean, you could write to the commissioner, or you could write to EPA or to us, requesting that, asking what the status is, or asking them to look at it.
You got that?
I'm writing it down right now.
I'll sign it.
I'm supposed to got it.
So, talking about injury, liability,
I'm gonna pause right here because this is a deep topic, and we will come back and revisit it. But I think that it would probably move the agenda considerably. Let's go back. We did talk about this in a previous meeting. Let's get that information, put it on the next agenda item so that we can. It's really difficult to, on the spur of the moment, recall exactly what's been done. Joe does a pretty good job, I'll say I'm impressed. I'm not able to recall that quickly. But let's bring that information back up that we had about the NERDA process and bring it in and actually prepare an agenda item for it in the next or upcoming meeting. Will that work?
Gives
Okay.
me time to hopefully get some residents, you know, to get their butts out
And we have some suggestions about what might help motivate a little more attention to it. So let's bring that all together and put as a package and put it on the agenda.
I got a question. So this is, the way I understood this, we're talking about the environment. We're talking about people.
Yeah.
We're talking about both.
There's natural resources include the ecological impact. So it includes impacts to groundwater, which is a natural resource of the state of New Jersey, wetlands, woodland, loss of wetlands, loss of impacts to streams. So any impact or loss, injury to a natural resource, some wildlife species or some type of vegetation area or some wetland or some groundwater is considered a natural resource injury.
And I think the question here is that it's being conflated. Let me just track with what I think is being asked and then have you weigh in. So Vivian mentioned about deaths and illness to individuals, so human health. Does human health get assessed in a NERDAR evaluation? And does the loss of natural resource function, is the impacts to the community a part of that assessment?
Natural resource injuries does not look at human health. No, that's
Okay.
different. That's the human health risk assessment that Joe talked about earlier. Those were done during the remedial investigation phases.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I want to address him. All right, my point is that it's been said several times, all right, that area where they want, where the O'Connor landfill is, we used to have a lot of fruit trees, and berries and the hunting grounds. So, we've lost all that basically because all that has been like wiped out with contamination, and it was a way of survival for a lot of people. The elders would go along the brooks and get watercress and, the different natural resources that are gone that we had depended on for survival. I remember, climbing the trees, getting berries, or the peach trees.
And that's my understanding.
Yeah, that's
A lot of that said something about people.
well, people, that's,
But the terms of what we're saying is it's two different things. That's what
For
I'm
the
trying to
way
understand.
that
well, it affects the
DEP deals
people.
with it, yes.
It's their way of, it was, a big part of our culture, and it affects the people, guess what? Our way of healing wasn't to go to the pharmacy where you couldn't go and get the pills or the, whatever. It was going up there and get those natural roots or this or that, and
Vivian,
Understood.
let me clarify, because I think we're getting the definition here, is that the natural resource damage assessment should look at the loss of that community resource.
yes.
That's what it says, human
Yes.
resources, that's what it says, Rhoda.
And the human health risk and impacts and community effects are related to it but not part of the NRDA. And those two that did get brought up, but they're related but separate.
They look at wildlife, they look at habitats, they look
So
at
you were
human
right.
resources.
I understand.
And I just want to say this, because for those that have never done, anyway, my son called me last week, all right? He has an 8-month-old baby who's had a fever of 105. So the first thing I tell him, it's not the Motrin. You go get that potato, okay? Cut that potato in half, and you cut strips of cloth. Put that around her ankles, and you'll see how that potato takes that fever out of that baby, and just, it gets bathed. This is my point, how we've always used
Understood.
you know, natural resources for overhauling, you know, to burn off for this or that, or, you know, and we've lost a lot up there, you know, that we've always depended on. I mean, things I would go buy a potato right now, but there's a lot of things. If I hadn't lived it, no, believe me, I have my own list. I lived this, so I wrote it.
And thank you. So thanks for bringing all those points up. We will bring this back up and try and get a dedicated session to it on the agenda and talk about what next steps, if any, could be used to motivate a little more activity on that. With the recap of the proposal for the recycling center, conversation has came up at the February meeting, working session. There was a presentation from Catherine O'Keefe about oh, here we go. And so now you can.
I put it to you at the meeting, I don't have it again now,
Yeah.
but it's something that the town has been exploring. Our town manager, John Spears here tonight too. I think he's been included in some of the meetings with Solar Cap, which is a program it's a pilot program that the state of New Jersey is doing. And it's an alternative where it will provide lower cost energy to people of low income. And I think about 20% of the community of this community, Vivian, would qualify for that. And we gave a copy to everybody here, and I don't know, I did reach out to Debbie Nance also to let her know that you were going to send a letter, right?
Yes, and so what happened then, as a result of that conversation, is it raised the point that the recycling center being placed on top of the geotextile cap provides protection to it so that it is not vandalized or inadvertently damaged that can cause exposure and exposure risk. Then the solar panel is another suggestion that has come forward about a use for that area. And if
Would provide the same type of protection.
provides the same type of protection. So what we had were two different options being discussed. And if those are the answers, the question is, what type of use could be constructed that would provide protection to the cap? With that discussion, the CAG members said, well, can we ask if that discussion can be had? Because that question was never asked, it wasn't discussed. What had happened is that the borough had come forward with a proposal to put in the recycling center, and now there's discussion for another alternative, and it seemed like it was a good idea. This was a good time to ask the question about what would be the best use to put on the cap and provide protection. So is that a fair recap from our February conversation? With that, a draft letter has been generated that asks the question, can that be revisited? I'm going to ask everyone to take just a few minutes to look it over. The CAG members are seeing it for the first time, but it's consistent with what we talked about in February. So take just a few minutes, and I'm going to ask if people have comments or
I have a question. So earlier, I forget this gentleman's name here.
Gary?
Gary, you had made a comment earlier about where we were in the process of the permits, issuing permits.
Yes.
So can you just repeat what you said? We are issuing permits for the recycling center?
No, that's not done yet. I was
Okay.
talking about the permits for implementing just the remedy with the cap. The recycling center, that's still in process. There's a pre-application meeting that's being arranged by the borough. I don't think it's been scheduled yet, but there's an additional permitting process that goes on with that. But the major parts of the permitting have been done as a part of the remedial action.
So does this change of use impact that process?
I would have to say yes.
So wouldn't the time to introduce this have been like a year or 2 years ago? Instead of now? I mean, if we're going to introduce these things at this point in the process, and let's just say that everybody goes along with it, and we get a year down the road, and then somebody else comes in and says, well, how about, I have another idea. When does that stop? Like, there's like 3 strikes and you're out, or you just keep going until everybody's happy, or? I mean, are we?
Let's pull apart a couple threads here. The first part was the content for the permits. Does that focus a lot on the work for installing the geotextile cap, or is it more than that?
It's basically to do the geotextile cap, however, with the understanding that there would be a recycling center over the top of a portion of that cap, and that a portion of that recycling center is on what's termed riparian zone, and if that riparian zone is taken, it needs to be mitigated at typically a 2-to-1 ratio. So that part had to be resolved with the remedial action. The rest of the permitting, like stormwater, soil erosion sediment control for the recycling center, is what has to still happen, because that's all part of the detailed design for the recycling center. But the environmental aspects of the permitting was handled at this point.
With that in mind.
With that in mind.
Now, if there was another use put on it, some of that work might apply, some of it might not.
The short answer is yes. I'm making an assumption that if the recycling center isn't built, that it stays where it is, and that if another use takes up a riparian zone, that issue of mitigation would have to be
Revisited, right.
The issue of what?
Mitigation.
Okay.
And let's read the letter, because it is a request, and in moving forward with your question of how long, how many iterations does it have, there are potentially responsible parties that are being asked the question of, can it be revisited and reconsidered at this time? And it is up to the potentially responsible parties to submit a reply. This is a letter of inquiry, and if people can just take a few minutes to read through it as a letter of inquiry, then we'll discuss, because it could go to Ford and the borough, and they will look at it and say, where do you stand in the process? Is it possible to address this? Yes or no? And that's a question that they...
It's not having an environmental impact. It's not impacting the environment, it's not impacting the water. To do this now, to make a change like this now, in my opinion, is purely political.
Okay, so
and I think that's out of bounds.
This is...
Especially when we could if we want to do solar, we could do it somewhere else.
Okay, so just the way this works is that the decision makers are not the CAG. The CAG is an advisory body. And there are positions that have been strongly held by different CAG members about what should or should not be done. The conversation about what the land use should be that would go on top of the cap to protect it, that discussion was never held. There's an alternative that was suggested that makes that question obvious, and it's asking the question, it is not answering the question. So the answer from the question does not come from the CAG. The CAG is not a decision-making body. It is up to the potentially responsible parties in conjunction with their efforts with EPA. But EPA would not be the decision makers for this. Is that right, John?
Well, we don't determine land use, so
Right.
basically the borough would have to inform us what the intended land use is.
So the request
And we would have
goes,
to react to that.
the request goes to the borough and Ford as an entity that's responsible for cleanup. about whether that can be revisited.
Right, so we're just going to go around and around, spend more time and money, and we're not impacting water, we're not impacting the environment. Again, it's a political area.
I don't understand when you say.
And if I may, the CAG has never been okay with the proposed recycling center. We did not just wait until now to bring it up.
We didn't know.
We have never been okay with it. We have made our feelings quite clear
You're not paying.
to the, neither are you. We have made it quite clear from the first time it was sprung on us that it was not appropriate for the people that lived in that area. New information that Councilwoman O'Keefe brought forward, which is the recycling market has completely and totally changed, which may negate the reason for the borough to have a new recycling center in the first place, because there's no value in recycling anymore. Excuse me, nobody interrupted you.
Okay, so
Nobody interrupted you. I'm in the middle now. So we have never been okay with it.
I'm going to.
Excuse me.
Wait, I'm going to add something here. As we know, there was a petition that was requested to revisit this, so it is not a new element about having the discussion brought up. It is a request to the borough and Ford to ask if there is room to consider what the final use is on top of the cap. And,
Oh, go ahead, you finish.
so,
I'm sorry.
it is a question of clarification. They are seeking clarification from the borough and from Ford as to whether that could be revisited. The question about impacting the water or the environment, this is a question of land use going to the borough.
Yeah, just an update here, at the last council meeting, the borough manager actually also said that the council might be interested in it. He was looking into it. I know the state of New Jersey has reached out to the CAG and the community because it's something that they are interested in doing. So this is not something that is just bubbling up right here. It's going on at the borough, it's going on at the state. So the request is definitely valid. I do think that Councilman SPEER and Councilwoman O'Keefe should be aware of the fact that Mr. Heck did state that usually this program required 20 acres to put a solar farm in, but since it doesn't really have that, but in fact it really does because it's a 36-acre site.
And here's the piece is, the level of conversation, just a second, the level of conversation about recycling markets, scale of solar, these are all pros and cons that would be associated with potential land use considerations for what goes on top of the cap. The question going out is there space to have a conversation about what goes on top of the cap?
And since we're talking land use, a thing I have repeated again multiple times is that site is in the residential zone. Its land use designation is residential. So from the very beginning that a new recycling center was proposed there, we have objected to it because we've objected to throwing yet another wrinkle into the middle of the people who have been subjected to living in a Superfund site for decades. And I would appreciate it if you not,
wait just a second.
I would appreciate it if you not attribute political reasons to everything that comes out of our mouths because,
Okay, folks,
because we have been involved in this
what we're going to do
from a different
is
perspective.
because things are very strongly felt here,
But this is the first time there's name calling going on there, and I've had enough of it.
and what we're going to do is ascribing something as political.
Thank you.
Is attributing motive, and that is part of our practice. There is a lot of strong feeling here, And also, the reality is that a discussion about the land use on the site for the CAP to OCDA has not been discussed. And the question is there an opportunity to discuss it now? There are several points that have been raised. One is that the zoning is currently residential, recycling center. It's not, that's a different type of use. And if different types of uses are going to be considered, one of the things that was brought up on the February work group session is that the community might be interested in other opportunities. What about a community center? That could be used for meeting space, it could be used to house health services, but all of these are options. And further down the line, the first question is to the borough and Ford, is there room to have a discussion about this? And that is what this letter is for. If you've had a chance to read it, what are your comments or thoughts about this letter? It is not being sent on behalf of the CAG. It is open to signature from those who want to participate in it. And if they are CAG members, fine. And actually, if somebody wanted to sign a letter who wasn't a CAG member, that could probably be entertained also. And if this is not what you think is productive, there's no need to sign on to it. There are other people who want to ask the question, just like with the NERDA. What's the process for asking the question about what can be done? And that's what this suggests. So,
Thank you, Lisa, for writing it.
Let me ask you a question. If you put a recycling center on it, or a community center, or whatever, it's a structure that needs water, needs bathrooms, it needs septic. How did you know on top of a recycling, on top of a cap?
so these are all different questions about use on top of it.
Somehow it doesn't make sense to me, because you're gonna have to dig to put a septic, you're gonna have to dig to put pipes, and obviously you've got a cap there.
So this,
What?
You're not gonna put a bathroom in. Right, so
They wouldn't put a bathroom on a recycling center?
I think they are.
There's a building to work here?
There's a fairly large building proposed on the site.
So-
One assumes people go to the bathroom. and work.
one of the things that has not been discussed is what it entails. Right now, there are proposals and concepts that were introduced to EPA and DEP, because the permits have not yet been done for the recycling center, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that level of detail and analysis hasn't been assessed yet.
Well, the one thing I would add is that we had the plans for the recycling center, and the way the cap was designed was to accommodate anything that had to be built in the subsurface. So that was part of the excavation and pullback plan for the OCDA, so that when the time came to build the recycling center, any construction that was subsurface would be in clean soils, and the cap would be
Subsurface would be what?
In
clean
consolidated.
soils.
Thank you.
Can I answer that? The current recycling center plan calls for a holding tank, not a septic tank. The holding tank holds the waste and is pumped every, however much you use it, every couple of weeks or however much you use it. So it does not go for a septic system. If you get a larger building, you're going to have to pump more frequently.
A holding tank more like an outhouse, whatever?
No, it's just a tank which holds your wastewater. There's no dispersion into
It's
the
like the
ground.
underground.
It doesn't go to a leach field.
Right.
Not a leach field.
It just
Right.
gets,
It's
it
just,
just sits in there.
but, you know, how much you use the water, how much you're gonna have to pump. They're pumped into the tank, not a leach field, because of the cap.
Also, to make one clarification, is what Scott Heck was talking about with the solar thing was on the existing recycling center, so let's not
That's what I was
mix up
afraid of.
two things.
Yeah, so the question is,
On what?
On the existing recycling
But
center.
Oh, yeah, so
that couldn't be there, because in the current remedy, the existing recycling center goes back to the.
right. So the question is, for those who are interested in sending a letter asking if there can be a discussion about the final use on the cap, does this meet your needs? Does it need additional detail? Is there anything that you would change about the letter if you wanted? We'll check in with the CAG and then ask anybody else.
Mr. EBERSBACH has, although I was at that meeting, and basically what Mr. Heck said was that.
I'm not interested.
Oh, I know, but
No,
what we
okay.
should put here is that Ringwood Borough had recently been involved in conversation about the possibility of building a solar field. I think there's some confusion because I think the state is thinking about that it's going to be in one spot.
So the fact is,
So I think we should.
there are
You
conversations.
guys back.
We don't have to clarify one or the other because there is confusion about it.
Right.
But there have been conversations and additional discussion would help clarify that. What they're talking about, where those photovoltaic fields would be considered.
What do you think, Kathy?
I think the ask was if the CAG had an opinion on what community would prefer between a recycling center being built on top of the cap or a solar. It wasn't about a health center or a
Oh, I
community.
understand.
No, it was just if you wanted to, if you had a choice between the two, what would be?
But it was on top of the
But it was
cap.
on top of the cap.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, and then the third
Yes.
thing came in because the residents find a voice in their opinions
Right.
again.
Again,
We're going to be left out of it, all these
Right.
discussions, and not aware of these discussions until years later.
So that's why I wanted you.
Yeah, it was for the cap, period. So I think we're going to put that in there.
is there anything that you would like to see changed? Elaine, if you wanted to sign on to it?
No, that's nothing I would like to change now.
Okay. Vivian, I know you're getting a careful scrutiny.
Vivian, you better believe it.
So
It is.
we'll go around the room. Anybody have comments about the letter? Thoughts about sending in?
Community center is not practical on that site. One of the reasons for this whole thing is to protect the cap. To build a community center, first of all, you need foundations. The second, you won't allow people in because they can't walk on the grass. It's got to be fenced and enclosed.
And again, because we're all problem solvers and we love to get down to the details, that is looking at the pros and cons about particular options. The question here is there room to have discussion about what could or couldn't be on the cap? But duly noted.
Pause.
Could I ask you, since you seem to know a little bit, why would that be a more active use than a recycling center?
Recycling centers can be on asphalt. That protects the cap below.
So we can't put community center on asphalt?
But people are still going to be coming in and out. Cars are going to be coming in and out.
Trucks that weigh 30 tons compared to
I
people
mean,
walking?
to me, that
And
seems to
so
be a
once
pretty
again,
high
this
volume.
is why I'm going to hold the conversation.
Yeah, let's hold this, because I gotta get my, I gotta.
And we are not going to evaluate the pros and cons. This is a question about, can there be a discussion about alternatives?
Starting the discussion.
Yeah, you know what, and I'm done with these.
The community deserves to have a discussion.
Right.
Okay? And
I don't think there's been public comments even since they changed the whole remedy, right? Comments were prior to that, no?
that's a question, Joe, for you. Was there public comment after contingency remedy was introduced?
No, the public comment was on the first proposed plan,
Isn't that
which included the contingency.
Isn't that?
No, because the contingency remedy was already laid out in the proposed plan.
It was already considered. If it had been brand new,
It was
then it
something
would have.
new.
Okay. It was for that contingency.
Right.
Okay.
But the official public comments, we knew nothing about this plan. Like, I put a public comment in, and so did a lot of other people, but
I know
we
I
didn't
did.
really know what we were public commenting about.
Now,
Really wasn't a good process.
if this letter is going to go forward, because the permits are not yet issued for the recycling center, and as was mentioned, candles burning, that this should probably go out sooner rather than later. I would like to hold this open for another day of review, just give people a chance to look at it. But in sending this out, the CC, it would go, right now, it's being sent to, for its technical coordinator, Colleen Lydell, and the borough manager, if there are better representatives for those two PRPs, that would be helpful to know. And on the back, right now, we've got generic placeholders. One of the things that was talked about is that without getting into the weeds, the mitigation question is a part of this, and who would need to be involved in mitigations. It was pointed out that apparently sometime in the past the government has waived the requirements for mitigation. Is that true? False? Anyone know?
I don't know.
Okay.
Ken's got jokes.
All right. So right now, if we can just identify who would be receiving these as CC, carbon copy, who at EPA would go to you and the RA, or just
So I
as
would
a
send
first?
it to Joe, and he can send it up the chain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can send it to me, I'll send it up.
Right.
Okay.
Wait a minute, so you two are both gonna send it to the same person?
No, I'll send it to my
This change. Now, in terms of elected officials, we have the offices of the senators and the assemblymen on our email distribution list. Is that, are those all of them? Okay. Are there other interested parties that?
I think so.
Go ahead.
I think we should consider Chief Perry. I mean, he, because he is the chief, of the railroad post, and he big, he has to do so.
He's an important elected official. Are there others?
Yeah, my mommy, my daddy. Don't get jokes down.
Okay, so we're going to CC Joe Gowers. Yep, and can the representatives and the senators?
Commissioner McCabe.
And what was the other one?
Take names.
Okay. Any others?
Did we include our US senator and someone in?
The representatives and senators, right. Okay, what we will do is today is Thursday, I will ask for comments back for any changes. I would like to get this back out for distribution at the start of the week. And what I'll do is add in the edits here, ask for any final comments, and then I'll ask CAG members who would like to be a signatory to the letter. And then it can go out.
Well, you mentioned perhaps other people would be interested who are not CAG members. I mean, I think you should bring that up for discussion too. There may or may not, I don't know, but that's a CAG decision.
I got brain freeze right now, so.
The other piece is, one way to handle that, and maybe we can all help brainstorm here, is that if it is signed by the CAG members who want to sign on with it, this can be distributed to other parties and say if they're interested in sending similar correspondence that they could. What do you think? What would be best?
It would be simpler to let the CAG members represent the community.
Well, there might be some people on the email list that you have, right?
Yeah, like Judy,
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I can think of a few that might want to.
So,
And people that are on cares.
Yeah.
well, what I'll do is ask for comments by close of business. I'll do the edits, and ask for comments back from the CAG by Saturday night, turn it around and ask for signatures, and then it sounds like we would say, this is a letter being sent by the CAG. If you would like your name added to the letter, please let us know by Tuesday. If after Tuesday you would like to submit a letter with your own perspectives, feel free to do so. Did that work? Yes.
Now, the group you're on, do you send anything like to environmental justice for Ringwood?
Environmental Commission?
Commission, whatever, so
Yeah.
should they be?
Now, if there should be someone who's not interested in being part of this letter, would they still put their name on there with abstain or
No.
not put their name on there?
We're just not putting, if you're not a supporter, you do not sign it. So, and people can send letters if they have different perspectives, they can do that also. But this is a letter that,
I would like Father Stephen to be on that list.
can you contact information from him? I'll get contact information from you so that we can.
Yeah, my house from Sunday.
Well, wait, to sign it or that he gets a copy of it?
Well, he might sign it,
Okay.
that's my report.
All right, so we have that. Now, with the last 10 minutes, what we're gonna do is walk through the highlights of the bylaws.
We're gonna walk around.
Yeah, right here. Bylaws were first established,
Maybe that's it for the videoing, right?
no, this is the last part. We're doing a quick recap. This is the recap of.
Well, you don't want it videoed, do you?
Yeah, she does.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you did, I'm sorry.
Okay. Is there, okay. We're going to walk through this very quickly. This is the high-level overview. These bylaws were, I think, originally established with Bob Spiegel.
Even before this.
So the first facility, Michael Woodcock started them. They were revised when Bob Spiegel was. And when we had a request for a new member to join the CAG, we realized that there was no language about new members. And as we went through this, we realized that there were a number of things that actually weren't addressed and probably need to be clarified. Most of the changes are in the first 3.5 sheets. One is we added a section about the purpose of community advisory groups because it's a little bit different than other stakeholder processes where an agency is a sponsor and they decide who to invite and they decide what the agenda is going to be. The nature of community advisory groups on sites is different. EPA can suggest this as an outreach tool, but EPA does not organize it. It's actually up to the community itself to organize a community advisory group, and there can be help with EPA. So you see in the shaded area, it does talk about EPA's role on page 1.
I think you should read it.
Well, first I want to just quickly walk through it. Purpose of the Ringwood Mines CAG, they had a mission statement already. We added that CAG members do not need to reach consensus or agree with each other, but they're encouraged to share their thoughts and ideas from the experiences that they have. The next page, on page 2, current scope of work from the Ringwood Mines CAG. This is much different than it was 5 years ago. So right now, as of February 2019, the focus is on the technical documents and plans for OU2, and planning for and selecting the remedy for OU3. CAG membership, it was a section where we added new options for establishing new members. It talks about the liaisons or ex officio capacity, and for the Ringwood CAG, the PRPs are asked to serve as liaisons, anyone with decision-making authority. They're not prohibited from joining the CAG.
And I think that that's important to keep in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's helpful in identifying members? That good faith efforts. While stakeholder groups and community advisory group members do not need to agree, the good faith effort is to be willing to listen, share your perspectives, provide the best information available, and to be honest and open and looking for creative options. There's some helpful strategies for communication. Now, going through the rest of it, this is a lot of what was in the bylaws before: responsibilities of the CAG members, responsibilities of EPA, liaisons, facilitator, the types of input that a CAG submits, the nature of the summaries and meeting notification, public attendance, public comments in the media, and agenda planning. At the end, where there's a slight revision on, this was designed for earlier, that after 1 year, instead of 1 year periodically, these will be revisited. But in addition to the responsibilities of EPA on page 5 about how they help the CAG, on page 1, it's really important to clarify that the CAG is an advisory body to EPA. They give advice. The decision-making on the proposals remains with EPA. There is, of course, the appropriate decision-making to be made by the PRPs in terms of the proposals, but EPA ultimately retains decision-making authority for the Superfund sites. And then at the top, it clarifies that EPA does not direct the CAG, because it would be a conflict of interest if they set the agenda saying, here's what you need to talk about. It's for the advice, it's for the community to determine what they want to investigate, what information they need, and the perspectives that they want to provide. So these are, that's the overcap, that's the overview of the bylaws for everyone here. Next meeting dates, I wanted to stay true to 9 o'clock, and we can stay later to discuss the bylaws.
We decided we were skipping April.
Well, one is, do we want to skip April? Do you want to push April back? What would be the best approach?
I won't be there.
Okay, so moving that, would you moving it or really?
Joe, what do you think? Do you think you have anything of consequence for April? Or do you think you have a better idea of the comments from New Jersey Water District today?
Well, I'd say we should definitely be back on May, but we could have something potentially back in later.
It's early May anyway, though, because it's the 9th.
Okay.
The
So,
second Tuesday is the 9th. The second Thursday is the 9th.
okay, so we cancel April and go to May. Already have some action items, and I'm going to follow up on the letter.
Anything you might want to add on that, Judy, that you wanted to reach out to Shannon about the edison wetlands?
Yeah, it's always the second Thursday, but we're skipping May. We're skipping it. Oh, we're skipping, we're going to May.
Skip April. So Father Stephen, right? Is that who Vivian said?
Yeah.
Okay. Any public comment? Anything that people wanted to have addressed, questions that they have, something that needs to be added to a future agenda? All right.
In page 2 of the proposed bylaws, it refers to, number 1, groups designated in the CIP. What is a CIP?
Oh, thank you. Community Involvement Plan.
It's not defined.
Okay, spelling that, girl. Thank you.
And that is on our webpage, if you wanted to take a look at it.
CIP?
Community involvement plan, yes.
That was on page 2?
Yes, and CAG membership.
Okay.
Number 1. Oh, yeah. There's a couple of places, like,
All right.
like all of them, actually.
With that, CAG members, do you want additional discussion on the bylaws tonight?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Do you want additional discussion?
I'm very good.
Okay. With that, everyone drive safely.
Wait, I have to get people cookies. Who has?
Yes, take something.